Hello, everyone. My name's Rob Rothschild. I'm the Marketing Director here at the Center for Applications of Psychological Type. And on your screen, you should be able to see our friend Felicity, who represents a group that is not just thrown together, but a fully functioning group made up of all different kinds of people. And we're here because, we all know that all work is essentially teamwork. But teams can sometimes get bogged down because what should be a synergetic combination of fully functioning people can devolve and it can become chaos and have communication problems. All kinds of things can happen on teams that can get in the way. And this is where you come in. You're here, we presume, because you're a leader, a member, or a consultant that is working on or with teams, and you have a need to make your team work really work. So that's the focus of today's webinar. And let's just get a little technical business out of the way here first. You can see on my screen now that I'm showing you the viewer window that you should see and the control panel that you have for GoToWebinar. And if you're hearing me, by the way, you can minimize that screen there, as you can see. If you're hearing me right now, you're using either your mic and speakers on your computer, which is muted right now, or you're using the telephone. And if you want to hear and if you're looking at your screen, you can't hear me now, please call this number. It's on your screen, and put in the audio pin that you see on your screen, and all will be well. We're going to proceed with the webinar with our author of the KGI, Bob Klein, in a minute. If you have questions, if you would, write them down in the questions window here, and I will do my best to read your questions at the end. We will have a Q&A period at the end of the webinar. You can also raise your hand. You can see that on the screen there, and we may be able to unmute some people's phones or computers, and you may be able to have a question directly, verbally, with Bob Klein. We'll see how many questions there are and how much time we have left, but certainly ask your questions in the question log there. If we don't get to your question, I will do my best to answer all the questions for everyone in an email after the event. By the way, you can make your screen full window, or you can just make it a window. You can see right here it's being shown in a window. So we're here to talk about the Klein Group instrument for effective leadership and participation in teams. And this is the results of a long and vigorous process of data gathering and analysis. And we are lucky to have with us the person principally responsible for that fine work. So everyone, please welcome Dr. Robert Klein, the author of the KGI instrument. Take it away, Bob.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank everyone for tuning in today. I'm pleased to talk with you about my instrument, with which we've had wonderful success in helping people acquire new and potent team leadership and group skills. The model, as we can see, provides a basic compass for interpreting and understanding small group dynamics. It identifies 4 essential functions that are critical to all small group life. And this could be even a family, but certainly a classroom activity, a sports team, a business enterprise, or a professional work group. The focus is on group situations where there is some work to be done, some project to be completed. In these situations, we need to attend to the leadership, task, interpersonal, and negotiation processes. When we closely attend to these elements, we're able to guide teams to higher productivity and greater effectiveness. We designed the KGI to be an independent instrument which can be used alone to strengthen leadership and team behavior. But it also can be used in conjunction with the Myers-Briggs type indicator, with psychological typology, and it extends the applications of typology deeper into group life. The KGI was developed over a 12-year period in which we trained thousands of people with the instrument in university, business, and professional settings. In large research studies, we got excellent reliability and validity results, which you can see, and which are all published in the KGI manual. With over 1,000 people in a correlation study with the KGI and MBTI measurements, and with interviews with hundreds of participants, we identified how the two instruments complement each other. we've identified the way that psychological preferences express themselves in groups. The two instruments create a potent blend for skill building. I want to say that over the last 15 years, I've trained thousands of people with the model and have had 100% success in helping people acquire new leadership and group skills. Everyone has gained at least one or two new skills, and many people have gone way beyond that, and I'll mention a couple of examples as I go along. I've trained people across the United States, in Australia, and in Europe, and have colleagues who are using the instrument in all those places with excellent success. For the past 8 years, I've been on the faculty of the C.G. Jung Institute in Zurich, Switzerland, the institute Carl Jung himself founded. Jung's book, Psychological Types, of course, is the foundation for the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. I've been training an international cast of counselors, coaches, and consultants to use this model. In fact, the Institute has asked me to develop an expanded intensive training program to be part of their future curriculum. But the beautiful thing is that this model is not only powerful, but it's simple and easy. And let's take a closer look at that. With leadership, we want to train someone to guide a group towards effective collaboration and successful task completion. With task focus, be able to develop a sound strategy and execute it well. With the interpersonal focus, we want to help build the team spirit, the camaraderie, and to pay attention to the feeling issues. With negotiation, we want to have people really listen to each other and find agreements that all members can buy into. When we do these things, we create the greatest cohesiveness with a team and boost its productivity. Now, in the center of the screen in the diamond there, we see the two arrows going out. That's because the model addresses a fundamental tension in groups that's been studied and documented, a bedrock aspect of groups for the last 50 years, the tension between task and interpersonal issues. And the model helps a leader and a group balance these aspects to attain high productivity. In this approach, it embraces many of the key ideas articulated in the emotional intelligence field, the ideas of Daniel Goleman, Peter Salovey, and their colleagues. Well, how do we do this? For each of those four major scales, we've, with advanced statistics, divided them into specific subscales which define skill set for that domain. For leadership, there is assertiveness, the ability to express ideas in the group. No one can be totally silent in a group session and be the leader of it. By definition, someone needs to express him or herself. For group facilitation, it's the person's ability to coordinate the negotiation, the task efforts, and the interpersonal relations in a productive way. And finally, the third subscale initiative is the ability to be the point person in a group, the primary leader. Through all of our research, we've seen how many people, both extroverts and introverts, are challenged in this regard. And this subscale is part of the engine that drives a lot of the skill development to help people develop that kind of leadership initiative. For the negotiation orientation, the two subscales are perspective taking, really the ability to listen closely and ask questions to understand others' values, interests, and needs, to get a deeper appreciation for these things. And then secondly, to develop constructive negotiations so that you get win-win agreements. This helps produce the synergy on a team that propels it to high performance. For the task-focused area, we have task analysis, help the team and the leader guide the group to develop effective task strategies. And with implementation, how to execute that strategy well, making the smart adjustments along the way that get strong outcomes. And finally, we have the interpersonal focus area, with positive group affiliation, developing that critical camaraderie, that team cohesiveness, and feeling orientation, the ability to address emotional issues, which so many teams shy away from. There's a real block here oftentimes. And in this approach, we integrate the use of the MBTI feeling function and ideas from the emotional intelligence field. The KGI allows us to do two things: to help individuals expand their personal group skills. But when we have a group of people all take the KGI individual profile, we can aggregate the scores and then be able to help a team improve their group processes, ways they collectively interact. And we'll look at each of these elements specifically. With the KGI individual profile, it's divided into the 4 major sections that we've just looked at: leadership, negotiation, task, and interpersonal. And as you enter the first part of each of those sections, what you see immediately is a graph. And it displays the level of energy investment that the person has. First of all, in that collective area, we see leadership on the far left, and then in each of the subscale areas. It's divided into low, medium, and high areas. And right away, someone can get a quick read and gauge the amount of energy that someone is committing to each of those specific domains of group life and begin to get a baseline to interpret patterns of behavior. This is followed then by a brief statement about someone's overall approach in that area of behavior, in this particular instance, leadership. But then this is followed by very critical information. For each of the subscales, there are things you enjoy, things that you may find difficult or challenging that are problematic for you, and then growth statements about how to improve your performance. Whether a person has a low, medium, or high score in a particular subscale area, there are always growth statements to help that person refine that area of performance. Cumulatively, there are 15 to 20 growth statements. Plenty of opportunities to build new skills. I had a young man who was 32 years old who participated in the Chamber of Commerce Leadership Institute that our College of Business at my university, Western New England University in Western Massachusetts, puts on each year for young leaders in our business and professional communities. This fellow used the KGI to develop 12 new skills, one each month over the course of a year. And I did follow-up work with him. Within 2 years, he was promoted to the director of marketing of his company. And when I had a conversation with the vice president of his company later on, he told me they were keeping their eye on this young man for potential executive management position. They were so impressed with his leadership development. I tell this fellow that he's a man after my own heart, because when I developed this, I could only hope that people would expand their skills to that kind of range, and it really then has a transformational effect. Now, what we see here are the composite graphs found on the last page. This is what a counselor, coach, or consultant would focus on with a client. It's the foundation for the whole analysis. The top graph displays the 4 major scales. With this graph, we look at the highest and the lowest scores. We would focus on here to see those 2 benchmarks. We see interpersonal focus as a very high, strong area of performance, and the softest being the negotiation orientation. This allows us to know where the person is most attracted to participating and where they might be the most reluctant. Then we can look down to the second graph below, the critical composite subscale graph. It looks like an urban skyline. We can see the flow of energy across all domains. In this example, we see that the person has a high score for assertiveness. This individual is expressive in a group and comfortable with that. Group facilitation is a bit lower. The question emerges, well, how in a leadership role could we help that person build this up? We can simply look across the other domains of the graph. We see the negotiation areas and the task implementation. Subscale could use strengthening. If an individual builds those up, they become a more well-rounded player in their leadership performance. And as a person builds up these skills, they could begin to take on more initiative with greater confidence and a greater array of skills to become more of a point person and primary leader in the group. Well, how would we build these skills? For perspective taking, constructive negotiation, and task implementation, for example, we go into those sections of the profile to find growth statements to work on. They identify specific behaviors a person needs to acquire. So basically, it's as simple as that. We can evaluate the patterns of energy, what would help round out performance, and then get suggestions for specific behaviors that will accomplish that. We've used the KGI individual profile for coaching, counseling, team building processes, and there's been skill development in business, professional, organizational, and educational settings. As we said, it's grounded in situations where a group needs to perform some kind of work or task or project. But in all of those contexts where we can do one-to-one advisement with a client, the KGI can have great applications. One thing that's been really very nice and a little surprising to me, I was training people for professional, business, and educational contexts, and people started to apply these ideas to their own families. I had a young executive I was coaching this summer, and she said, yes, it's helped me in my work context, and she identified a number of team situations, but she said, using these ideas, I adjusted how I communicate with my husband. And as I did more positive things, he decided that he would make some positive adjustments himself, and our communication as a couple improved significantly. And I was really pleased to hear that, because these group skills can be applied to all group contexts. Now, when we're working in a professional context, what does it allow us to do with a client? It helps to establish a systematic way for a client to look at group situations. As we said, it gives a basic compass for interpretation. The beauty of it is we're focusing on fundamental elements of group dynamics, so we're never in left field. We're looking at key issues and areas to make adjustments in. It not only helps people improve their leadership, of course, which is a focus, but also their group membership skills. And being a good quality group member often is just as important as having a strong leader. It helps people understand other people's patterns of behavior, which then in turn helps them improve the way they can negotiate agreements and also understand conflict and come to manage it better. We all have been in groups where there have been tensions and conflict, and we know how that disrupts the work. When we can problem solve with that and move the group into a better, more productive area, that's worth gold to us, I believe. When working with individuals, we can follow these steps in the leadership and group skill development. What we do in our coaching process is we identify key strength areas and assess areas that are problematic. But in working with a client, what new skills would be most valuable and most meaningful for that person? And in what ways do they want to try to expand the leadership skills? Now, we have 9 subscales. There are a lot of suggestions. We want to prioritize the new skills and put them in a pecking order and get in a learning agenda. And then it's always the matter of putting good ideas into practice. And we recommend that, that if someone starts to actually do new behaviors in groups, that they work with one or two skills at a time. Self-regulation theory in psychology suggests that, if we concentrate on one skill, we can really focus on it, keep clarity, and put good energy into it. Two skills seems to be the right range at any given time that would be the maximum someone would want to try to work on. Persistence always pays. And so if someone continues to practice, what we found is someone works on new skills that after 2 or 3 attempts, they start to get into a greater comfort area and get more traction. So as I've done further research, we've seen that as people have persisted, but if we have a difficult first experience, that we try it a second or third time because we may be right around the corner from really starting to get a little more polished, make an adjustment with it, and get more confident. And that's what I've seen happen with the psychological transformation with this. As someone develops a couple of new skills and starts to get a positive momentum, their confidence goes up. They start to have a new vision of what they can accomplish as a leader or group member. And then they have the opportunity to build additional skills. When I've seen people go into the 4, 5, 6 skill area, we've really seen them go to another level of performance. I mentioned the fellow who did 12 now. He was really dynamic. But the thing is that the 4, 5, 6 skill area can really be transformative. And this is what our research has shown. And then people start to apply the skills broadly, not just in a particular work context, but in family relations, other social settings, and they gain momentum that way too. The MBTI preferences then give insights into the psychological energies that help people get a deeper understanding of their personality type, others' typologies, and how to work with that constructively in social contexts. Now, as we mentioned, when we aggregate those individual scores for a team, when they take it together, and we can do that through the administration at CAPT, we're able to then gain a group profile. And in many ways, it parallels what we do with the individual profile, but it's a bit expanded, and we'll look at that. With the group profile, we get an executive summary that gives a couple of graph representations that are a bit different. But here's one with what we call the horizontal graph that gives the ranking of the team's performance on all of the subscale areas, starting with the highest and down to the lowest. And I'll talk a moment on how we can do analysis with that. But I always like the visual material that allows us to use that spatial intelligence, as Howard Gardner would say, to interpret that and to think about it. Then for each section, like the individual profile, you open with a graph for that particular area. Here we have a task focus graph opening that subsection. And again, we see the columns for the team performance here. And what you see is a rectangular box with a line with a diamond. The diamond shows you the median score for the team. And the top and the bottom of that rectangle show you the lowest score for the team and the highest score. So we can look at the range of member scores, and this is all anonymous. It doesn't identify anyone, but it does show us the kinds of strengths different members are bringing to the team effort in this area. And it is counterintuitive. Let me just point out with the major scale, task focus scale on the far left on this graph, that the area that's smaller on either side of that diamond is the most dense. So here, for example, we'd see that it's smaller underneath the diamond, so that's where the greater number of member scores would cluster. And then there is someone, who's more proficient in this area and may be able to mentor or role model or help lead the group in certain discrete ways that can utilize that skill and help others build skills. And then finally, at the end of the group profile, we have the steps for building an action plan. So as a consultant works with a team, they'll have the basic outline of how to use this material and put into action, and the consultant can then collaborate with them. But it gives, a specified game plan that makes it easy to apply and use for the team. and the consultant can facilitate this. Okay, when we're working with groups, here will be some of the steps for making them more effective teams. Just like we were saying with the individual profile when we looked at those composite graphs, we want to look at the graph material because that will give us evidence of their pattern of performance across the KGI domains. And we'd look at the strengths, we'd look at key areas to work on, and we want to balance performance, as we were talking about with the individual profile, to make a team more well-rounded in these key areas of functioning. Now, when a consultant works with a team in a team-building process in this manner, the graphs a person would look at with the team would be, first of all, the composite graph for the major scales, which, similar to the individual, shows you the level of endorsement or energy investment. But again, with the rectangular boxes that display the team's members' cluster of performance. Now, when we look at the leadership scale on the left, we can see that all the team members have a very tight cluster here. All of them are performing in a pretty similar way. They're all around right in the middle of medium. This might say that, hey, maybe we want to do a training intervention where everyone could benefit and build their leadership skills. We certainly will be able to work with individuals with their KGI individual profiles and coach them in this regard. But when we see a tight cluster like that, sometimes a training intervention could be good. On the far right, we see the interpersonal scale. And here we have a very broad range of team performance. Now, we have some people who are very high here, but we also have a strong cluster who are in the low, medium, and low area. But we do have people who are skillful in this area, who can perhaps mentor, who can facilitate aspects of the interpersonal work in the group and be able to show people proper skills, also can provide hints and leadership in helping the whole team gain more insight. Then we have the ranking graph, which we mentioned, the horizontal graph. And when I work with a group, people tend to look at the negative. It's easy to look at the bottom third of this graph. It's broken into 3 areas. Again, a kind of low, medium, and high area. But I like to start with the top area and affirm some strengths. Here we'd see strength in group facilitation and task analysis. But sometimes it always is good to ask a team if somehow they might be using a strength too much. I've seen teams with a very high task analysis score where all the players are really invested in that area, overanalyze tasks and have trouble taking action and implementing. And so this can help us analyze that. In fact, with this group, we can see just that problem. The task analysis at the top is the second highest. The lowest of all is task implementation. I guarantee you there's a gap between thinking and performance there that, if that was brought closer together, would improve that team's overall effectiveness. And then certainly we can always look at the bottom 3 scores and actually the bottom 4, which can target some key areas that the team might want to work on. Interestingly, here in this example, the group facilitation, a leadership area, has some strength. There is talent and ability there with the members. But there seems to be some reserve here with initiative and assertiveness. And maybe everyone isn't expressing their ideas that could be beneficial to the group and facilitate it better. So these are the things that we can balance to help make the team more effective. And then finally, we get the flow of energy. We get that composite subscale graph, like we were looking at with the individual profile, and again, with the range of scores. And where we have a broad range, we would use some different strategies, as I've mentioned, versus a tight cluster. But again, we can look across all of the fields of performance and help the team strategically balance its efforts. Now, like the individual profile, when we identify particular subscale areas that we want to work on, when we go into those sections of the group profile, they'll have process suggestions instead of individual behaviors for one person, they'll have how the team can improve its process with assertiveness or constructive negotiation. So we'd want to prioritize our objectives, select then appropriate process suggestions from those subsections, and there is a menu of 6 or 7 for each subscale that gives a range of options for how to improve the processes. And we could also identify potential training needs, as we mentioned, or mentoring options. And as always, then get the team to try out a new strategy and to become a reflective team. J. Richard Hackman, one of the great theorists on task teams who passed away a year or so ago, unfortunately, who wrote a great book, Leading Teams, said that, when a group becomes a learning team, it can vault its performance much more rapidly and successfully because people are analyzing and supporting each other and growing together in building and refining task strategies and overall group strategies and refining those processes. So the KGI allows individuals to grow and benefit, and also the team as a whole, but by creating a learning team, as Hackman would advocate for. Now, when we did a major correlation study with 1,300 people who took both the KGI and MBTI, we emerged with these correlations and from serious statistical analysis, and also I did hundreds of qualitative interviews to investigate this at a deeper level. But what we see here on this page is how the two instruments overlap, and we can see the power of using them in combination. In the leadership area, the extroversion-introversion scale had meaningful statistical correlation. Extroversion we would expect because extroverts are socially oriented by nature. They like to share their ideas. They like to move activities and group projects along. They facilitate. But when you read the best literature in the field about what makes an effective leader, they talk about good listening skills, good observation skills. These are traits that are more often exhibited by introverts in a group. And when you learn to blend these two, you get to the most powerful leadership style. And this is part of the extroversion-introversion dialectic that is promoted by the KGI model. On the task focus, I don't think anybody who's acquainted with MBTI would be surprised by these findings. Sensing types are practical. Thinking types like a logical process, and judging types like to get the project done. So we see the strong STJ endorsement in the task area. The other side, on the interpersonal focus, is the feeling function, which is interested in relationships and people connecting, positive atmosphere, that team spirit. And balancing these two has been shown to create the most powerful performance when we can have a strong task focus, but also pay attention and respect the interpersonal needs and build that camaraderie. The negotiation orientation helps both of those sides. It helps a team negotiate task strategies. It helps a team resolve interpersonal conflicts or support people's enthusiasm so we delegate assignments to people who have a lot of energy and interest and emotional charge with that. Perceiving types like to look at a lot of options. They like to hear a lot of ideas. They're good about inviting people and hearing a range of ideas in a group discussion. Intuitive types are able to look at connections, associations between different ideas to find a middle ground for win-win. So what we see here is the very beautiful overlap between the two models that we've been excited about at CAPT and has been very powerful in training people to be able to give insights into their psychological energies and how these connect to fundamental group operations that they can now build skills in, both with their original preferences and also inducing people to work on their opposite preferences to become stronger leaders to balance these operations in a group. For many years, I've been working with the College of Engineering at my university, and 2 years ago, we got a major grant from the Klein Foundation to train all of the freshman engineers in KGI and MBTI to help them with their lab teams in their future professional development. I talked to a friend who's a chemical engineer and asked him, how much are you involved with groups in your company? And he said, it's 70% of my work. So we got a grant and we used the two instruments to train the students, and we got such remarkable and wonderful results that after the grant ran out, the university has paid, for investment into the instruments to be able to continue the training. And I'm currently training 200 engineers, freshman engineers, on a Friday afternoon in an amphitheater, if you can imagine it. It's like a section of a football stadium. And but we're getting their rapt attention about how they can help themselves be more effective leaders in group skills, and showing them how important this is for their high performance in the university, in their laboratory work, but also in their future. And my colleague, Richard Grabiak, contributed this quote as an endorsement based on the work we're doing. In fact, we're having conversation at my university to potentially include this training for every student who enters as a first-year student in the future. So I'm going to let my colleague, Rob Rothschild, pick up from here.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate that. That was a wonderful presentation on how we got to where we are with the KGI and what the KGI can do. In addition to that quote from your colleague, we also gather data anonymously from people who take the KGI, everyone who takes it as an opportunity to add some comments via a survey. And I thought I'd add this one here because it strengthens what you were saying about how the results can be correlated with the Myers-Briggs type indicator. And this person says, it confirmed what they felt like they got from the Myers-Briggs. And another interesting one here is, and we may have all found ourselves in this situation, it's possible, where your current role may not be your more preferred leadership role. And so it was good for this person to find out about that, like he says or she says, not necessarily a bad thing, but enlightening. So the KGI can reveal, maybe you're not in the best possible group, but you may get tools so that you can operate efficiently and happily with the group that you're in. So just to echo what Dr. Klein said, and a lot of questions that we've had are the KGI is an unrestricted instrument, so you can begin using it with your teams and individuals right away. We don't have a certification program, but we do recommend that you examine and read all the support materials. And again, we just keep continuing to get positive feedback from people who say it promotes and increases, group cohesiveness and productivity. You'll find the KGI on the CAPT website, and everyone takes it online. As many of you have taken it and had a chance to experience it, you see that you get your report back quite quickly. When you are a facilitator, you can control the timing of the delivery of those reports, and that can be done via email, or you can walk in the door with the report yourself. So we have a lot of ways for you to interact with your customers, or for you personally to take it. And remember, you can take it as a group member, as a group leader, or as a consultant to that group. So I hope you've learned a little bit about how you might be able to turn your teams around with the KGI. And Bob, I have a question to read to you. First question, and here it is. This is from April. She says, is the KGI effective with teams that already have a clearly defined leader? For example, a leadership team that is comprised of leaders working together with their manager. She thought the profile seemed more geared towards someone who is not a leader. And I responded just initially saying, well, you never know when you will be asked to have a leadership role in any particular project, but perhaps you could amplify on that, Bob.
Yes. One thing is that when you take the profile, and someone may have certain leadership strengths, in each of the subscale areas, there are always growth suggestions on how someone may further refine their practice with task analysis or positive group affiliation. So whether one's an established leader and a practice leader or not, it always has some suggestions on how someone might refine particular skills they have. Now, what our experience has been is that even with topic CEOs, vice presidents, there are often times, and this ties in with psychological type, that they have certain preferences and they have certain skill sets that have promoted their leadership and they've been very effective with, and someone who's very effective with task analysis and task implementation, can have a wonderful track record and be promoted up. But that doesn't always mean that someone is strong in perspective taking or negotiation, with the interpersonal skills of creating a team spirit, or paying attention to feeling issues. That lots of times is neglected, and that's where the whole emotional intelligence connection comes in. But lots of times, even as people are established leaders, there are gaps. And we've been really able to open up the eyes of many established leaders and work with many people. I've worked with vice presidents and CEOs and some of my colleagues that have really improved the quality of their teams and their organizations by making them more aware of a well-rounded performance and, addressing the neglected areas. Also, when you have an executive group, having people be good team members and share leadership in a constructive way fits in with Mahai Csikszentmihalyi, who had that idea of flow, and how shared leadership creates greater investment. And sometimes with an executive group, how you balance the power of a lot of strong leaders on a team and share leadership and collaborate more effectively creates the flow, which creates the synergy. So these, certainly people who, freshman students in engineering, for example, have a long ladder to climb professionally, and are rookies. But we found even with the high-end executives that it opens their eyes to understanding group dynamics in new ways, and there can be skills to refine or new skills to build on, and also how to share leadership in effective ways that helps the teams.
Good. Thank you. Here's another one for you, Bob. Maybe slightly related. April asks, Jane asks, let me get the names right here. Jane says, is the basic assumption behind the KGI that all teams need to improve, or is there a score level that indicates a team is already high performing and possibly just needs to maintain quality and reassess if there is a transition in membership? I initially responded saying it's pretty rare to find a team that has high scores across the board, but what do you think, Bob?
Yes, it is. In working with many organizations and thousands of people, to see a team that comes in with high scores across the board is exceptional and very, very rare. So there usually is some aspect of it that could use attention. Now, you also have, as we saw with the rectangular boxes that shows the level of endorsement by all the team members, the team can be can be in a high-performing area, but there can be people who are very, in the medium or low level, who, if they develop their skills, it would even further strengthen the team's performance in that area. So the team can be intentional about all of the members building skills in a particular area that will fortify and enhance it. But it also opens up a lot of conversation. But what I see with teams is too that over time they shift, that one member or two drops out and another member or two is added, and it then shifts the dynamic of the team. And so the KGI has been helpful in integrating new members and looking at what assets or challenges someone may bring who, when the team is reconfigured, and there lots of times is movement with membership. So, but it's rare to see an entire team high across the board and clustered high across the board. I mean, it's, I don't think I've ever seen that per se.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. Here's another one relating to getting started. Russ says he's familiar with the MBTI as a certified trainer. How well do you think this would prepare me for facilitating a group administration of the KGI with 7 school board members?
I work with educational systems. I think that it opens up a conversation about how the team is operating. And it looks at, the beauty of the instrument is it looks at 4 basic processes that are essential to all teams, and you can look at how the team is performing. Now, with a group of 7, what would be excellent, and this is what I often do, I'd have each individual I would speak to, because we'd have that person's individual profile, and we could look at some things that person could build skills in. And then you can examine the collective processes with it. But they brought me into a major company, which everyone would know right away if I mentioned the name, and they had a team that was struggling for a number of years. In the same way, I worked individually with each of the members, so everyone felt there was something in it for me. I think that's something that goes on, that every individual says, how can I benefit and grow in this context? But then as we did the group materials, it opened up the conversation in very powerful ways for us to analyze how the group was functioning without identifying people in negative ways, but to look at our processes and then have choices on how we could improve the processes. So I think the individuals were motivated because they saw opportunities for personal growth, but also that we now had a model that would open up how we interpret and look at our group dynamics and then adjust those processes accordingly. And this is what, as Richard Hackman said about a learning team. I have found when I've worked with those types of groups that we've been able to identify where maybe sometimes they were overusing certain skills to the detriment of being a better, well-rounded team, or there were areas that needed to be improved, and we could create dialogue and intention to bring those actions in to improve their processes.
Good, thank you. I'm going to combine 2 questions here for you, Bob, because I think they're related. Troy says, was wondering about what the threshold is for where a subscale becomes career limiting and needs to be addressed, and when it is above the threshold and safe to keep performing at that level. And sort of related is Kathleen's question, do the behaviors that help you grow vary depending on the ranking of the subscale?
No. Let me take that point first. They're not calibrated to the ranking of the subscale. They are calibrated to a person's response to the cluster of questions in the instrument that address that particular subscale area. So, the particular growth statements that one gets, are related to the individual items and how one responds to the instrument. Collectively, then you get a ranking, but the growth statements are independent of that. Could you refresh me with the first part of that question, Bob?
It was, is there a threshold for where a subscale becomes career limiting? Is there a magic spot where you can leave it alone, or maybe you might start working on something?
That's a great question. And here's what the refined research showed me. That the high, medium to low, high area tended to be the power zone, particularly I think the low, high. Now, when you go above the middle of the high area, what somebody tends to do is potentially overuse that skill. We've seen people with assertiveness who are up in the top half of the high area, maybe right up to the ceiling, who when I've interviewed them have said, gee, I really want to get my ideas out, I want to participate, but people see me as domineering. We've seen people with a very high task analysis score who are so driven about the analysis, neglect bringing in other people in terms of getting a collaborative effort, or neglecting implementing the task or taking action. So in the very high area, somebody is in love with that subscale area, and love can be blind. And this goes right in with Jungian analytical psychology and depth psychology, that that we can overheat by the overuse of particular skills, and now it's too hot. And so bringing that down sometimes is exactly what people have done to be more effective in groups. And sometimes a very, clear or very clear extrovert needs to dial down to be able to bring the introverts into the conversation more and not dominate too much. So with the KGI, that low-high area is beautiful. The high-medium is strong, but you can get too high, and it's a great question. And we've calibrated this with the writings in depth psychology.
Thanks. That helps explain it, I think. Here's a question here that's interesting. Diane took the KGI, and her reaction was her profile did not seem to accurately reflect her leadership style. Should she retake it? Did she fail to approach the testing, the mindset correctly? What do you think about that, Bob?
I always think that, and what I tell people, I think when they take the test, it's very good for them to think how they've operated in small groups in the last 2 or 3 months, and to think very concretely about that. I think that grounds someone then in a fresh and recent way that usually then, gives them accurate scores. Sometimes if people are taking it with a general focus, they may be thinking about a broad range of group contexts, and they, may respond in a lot of different ways. That could affect the score. We do create the option for someone to take the test with a specific team in mind, and people generally have been very happy with those results. But similarly, in my work with the MBTI, sometimes people feel, well, certain subscales fit me well, but I'm not so sure about this score that made me a sensing type or an intuitive. And sometimes it's because people have a slight score, and there's, they have energies from both sides operating. And so anyway, there's a number of things that one can consider. And, I would suggest that she reflect on that, and maybe then if she wanted to take it in terms of a specific group that she's operating in now and locate herself with that, assess those results and see how that seems to fit.
Thanks. That's great. Here's one last question I think we have time for here. Kathleen says, as a consultant, would you take a different approach to a team that has consistent scores among members versus teams that have a high standard deviation?
Yes, and I think that, when you have members who, are clustered, you can, it depends on where they are, on that column, clustered. I mean, they can be clustered high, which allows them to share leadership in that area because you've got a lot of members with skills, and you want to then respect those skills and be inclusive with people. If you're clustered in a low area, as I mentioned earlier, maybe that's where everybody could use some training in that particular skill area, and so that could be part of an intervention that a consultant could use with that group. What you have usually then is, if they are clustered, people may have similar problems if it's a low cluster, or people may have very similar strengths. It certainly opens up a dialogue with the team when everybody is, is tight in terms of how that team scores in that rectangular box. You do approach it differently when there's a broad range of scores, but I think usually two things apply, and one is that the people, and one can just ask is, for the team, who has some insights about this? Now, people with high scores, say in feeling orientation, have refined their emotional intelligence and can give some insights about what helped them do that or what things they pay attention to. That helps inform people with low scores on it. But I think that you want to look at then opening up the discussion with the team when you have a broad range, so that the knowledge and ideas and the strengths of that team are being shared, and helping other people grow or helping other people think more insightfully. And that can be one of the strategies you target with a broad distribution. But there's leadership possibilities and ways to delegate then based on who your strongest players are.
Great. Thanks, Bob. We've reached just about 1 hour here, so we're going to wrap this up. Some of the questions that you asked I did not get to, and some of them I tried to answer on the screen. We will try to, in a follow-up email, answer any unanswered questions. Also, in a follow-up email, look for connections to see this webinar as a recording on the web. We'll do that. We also will try to share the PowerPoint file with you too, so you can have that. Please also feel free to ask me any questions you'd like at all about the KGI and the mechanics of taking it. My email address is easy. It's rob@capt.org, rob@capt.org. And if there's a question that I'm stumped with, of course, I'll pass it on to Dr. Klein, and he'll help me out with it like he always does. So thank you all so much for attending. Remember that we are here for you if you have any questions at all about anything CAP does or about the KGI. And we appreciate your attendance to this webinar, and we hope you have a wonderful day. And thank you, Bob, for a great presentation.
My pleasure, and thank everyone for their interest and good wishes.
Okay, everyone. Thank you so much. Please feel free to get back to us if you have any questions. We're ending the webinar now. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.